Sagittarius Woman, The Wild Heart, Episode 1, Caged by Emotion. Chapter 1's The Bell and the Arrow. They met because a brass bell rang at sunrise. The meditation retreat sat on a ridge above the sea, the kind of place where the wind tasted like rosemary and the mornings had a hush that felt curated. She had come because her life had started to feel like a narrow hallway with too many doors, work invitations, flirtations, open skies, and she couldn't tell which ones were exits and which were mirrors. Sagittarius to the bone, she craved movement the way others craved proof. The brochure promised quiet clarity. She imagined a map. He appeared on day one barefoot in linen with a shy smile like a secret tide. Pisces, he said later, when they traded birth charts over herbal tea as if swapping passports. His name was Julian. He spoke softly with a steadiness she could lean on without realizing she was leaning. When the teacher said, "Observe your breath," he closed his eyes as if greeting an old friend. When he listened to her, he did the same. They paired for a walking meditation. The instructions were simple: lift, move, place. Her steps wanted to lengthen into a hike. His were patient, as if the ground had stories he was not willing to interrupt. "You're fast," he whispered, smiling. "You're anchored," she returned. The wind pressed her hair against her neck, and she felt a clean, surprising warmth. That night at satsang, the group sat in a circle and traded reasons for coming. "I need space," she said, more honest than she intended. "From everything." Heads nodded. She felt seen and then felt the quick flare of panic that usually followed being seen. Julian spoke last. "I want to feel connected again," he said, "to myself, to people. My life is watery right now. I want to know which currents are mine." Later, under a sky pricked with impossible stars, they walked the gravel path to the dorms. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing, then something. She tasted peppermint from the tea, salt from the ocean, the small electricity of almost. He said good night with a soft laugh that made it too easy to linger. She didn't. Back on her cot, she stared at the knotty wood ceiling and listened to crickets sawing the dark in half. Freedom, she reminded herself. The word was a compass needle steadying, and yet the idea of his hand, open, unasked, waiting, moved in her like a tide neither of them had called. She slept restlessly and woke before the dawn bell, barefoot on the cold floor, watching the horizon bleed from slate to rose. When the bell finally rang, she smiled despite herself. Somewhere near the zendo, a door opened. She knew without looking whose it was. Chapter 2, Saltwater Honey. By day 3, their conversation felt like a long inhale neither of them wanted to end. They drifted to the edge of every group, found corners under the cypress by the driftwood altar where talk could widen into confession. He spoke about the year his father left and the way it taught him to be careful with goodbyes. She told him how, as a girl, she would climb the tallest hill just to see what lay beyond it, then run down without thinking how she'd climb back. "You're brave," he said. "I'm evasive," she corrected, but the word brave slipped under her skin and warmed her. When he meditated, tears sometimes slid down his face, not dramatic, just there, like condensation on glass. It surprised her, tendered her. In the afternoons, they helped the kitchen team rinse romaine, slice citrus, press lemons until their palms smelled like light. He touched everything as if it were breakable. She touched everything as if it were a door. The first kiss happened without a plan. After evening chanting, the teacher dismissed them into a night so clear it felt rinsed. They walked to the cliff path where waves unrolled like white sheets being snapped clean. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and didn't remove his hand. She tilted her face. The kiss began like gratitude and deepened into hunger, a low ache rising, not impatient but insistent. The ocean breathed their names. They found the shadowed nook by the meditation hall, a cedar windbreak, the scent dark and green. His breath quickened, hers matched. Clothes became suggestions. Her back met wood, his palm met the small of her spine. Her sigh broke and found itself again against his mouth. They moved together with a softness that bordered on worship, a slow discovery that made the world narrow to skin, breath, pulse. When they finally stilled, foreheads touching, the crickets resumed like a choir they'd briefly directed. "Is this a retreat sin?" she murmured. "If so," he whispered, smiling, "we'll atone at breakfast." She laughed, and something in him seemed to bloom at the sound. He held her the way a question holds its own answer, gently, completely, for a moment. Back in her room, the sweetness followed her like a tide mark, but along its edge, a thought walked, careful. She wasn't used to wanting and staying in the same place. Desire for her was usually a horizon chased, reached, left behind. The next day, he reached for her hand before the sit began. She felt the warmth of his palm, the claim in the gesture. She let him hold it, then gently slipped free as the teacher's bell sounded. He looked startled, then hurt, then smoothed it away with a practiced kindness that felt heavier than anger. At lunch, he asked where she'd wandered during the morning break. Down the beach, she said, just moving. Without me. I needed air, she said, and immediately regretted the phrasing. He nodded, a slow, careful nod, like someone agreeing to a compromise they didn't choose. The romaine creaked under her knife. In her chest, something tightened, then bucked. The ocean kept breathing, indifferent and endless. She found that both reassuring and terrifying. Chapter 3: Currents and Nets. Closeness, she discovered, could feel like a blanket or like a net. With Julian, it began as the first and threatened the second. He loved check-ins, morning, how are you feeling really? After meditation, what came up? Before bed, are you with me? The questions were gentle, his eyes luminous with care, but they piled like pebbles in her shoes. She started editing her answers to avoid opening doors she didn't have time to close. I'm good, she'd say, forcing a smile. Centered, the word tasted like chalk. He noticed anyway. I can feel you drifting, he murmured, thumb circling her wrist. Just tell me where you are. Here, she said, with you, and also, she gestured at the line of sea, out there. His mouth softened. I want to come, he said, half joking, wholly serious. She tried to explain the paradox that had always defined her, how closeness made her want to run, and distance made her want to leap back into arms. It's not you, she said, true and also incomplete. It was his way of loving that made her feel held, and the holding made her count exits. That evening during a partner exercise, they sat knee to knee. The instruction was to breathe in sync, eyes open, without speaking. At first it was intimacy distilled, two bodies, one tide. Then it became pressure, a metronome she couldn't break. She looked away, he flinched. Afterward he pulled her aside behind the tea station. When you look away, I feel abandoned. The word struck too close, lightning on dry brush. I'm still here, she said, sharper than she meant. I just needed a blink. His face folded. I'm not asking for everything, he said. Only honesty. I am being honest. She heard how defensive it sounded and ran a hand through her hair. I need space sometimes. That doesn't mean I won't come back. He nodded, then later asked if they could sleep in the same room that night. She hesitated, pulse snagging on the request. Let's not make this bigger than it is, she said, trying for lightness and landing on cold. The next morning he cried during the closing sit. She put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremor, wanting to melt and to step back at the same time. Guilt rose like a tide, grabbing at her ankles. In the quiet after chanting, he caught her eyes with a softness that felt like a plea. I don't want to lose this, he whispered. You won't, she lied, because the alternative was too cruel to say aloud. Walking the cliff path alone after lunch, she stared at the horizon until her eyes watered. Love, she thought, isn't a chain or a door, it's a wind. It should move through you. The thought steadied her for a step and then scared her for the next. She could hear his voice at her back, but winds can blow things apart. By dinner, she'd rehearsed the speech. I like you. I want this lightly. I need my own room. She found him by the rosemary hedge, the sky bruised purple behind him. He reached for her, relief on his face, and the speech tangled in her throat. I made you tea, he said, offering warmth like a vow. She took it, and with it a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. Chapter 4: The Elastic Heart. They tried agreements. She suggested mornings apart, solo walks, separate sits, reconvene at lunch. He agreed, then found her on the beach at 10 a.m., face lit with I missed you. She smiled and felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. At Circle, the teacher spoke about attachment as a hand, open, closed, or reaching. Find the hand you offer, she said, and the one you can receive. Arya, she had finally told him her name without the high-spirited joke she often used like a shield, stared at her own fingers, flexing. Open felt right, reaching felt dangerous, closed felt dishonest. That night a storm rinsed the sky. They huddled in the library, rain ticking the windows, books smelled like raincoats. He found a volume of Rilke and read in a voice that made the lamp's halo feel cathedral soft. You must give birth to your images, he read, and looked up at her with a faith that hurt. He wanted to co-parent a vision. She wanted to shoot arrows into it and watch them arc. When the rain softened, they kissed again. The kiss wasn't hungry, it was aching. They moved to the floor cushions, the world narrowing to breath and whisper, the rhythm they found careful and slow. When he touched her, it was with a reverence that threatened to claim her. When she touched him, it was with a tenderness that threatened to promise. They pressed close, bodies learning, then rested foreheads together, quiet. She memorized the pattern of his lashes against his cheek and the lightning-strike fear that came with tenderness. After he asked if she would stay the night, she tried to joke. What is time? He smiled, not fooled. I sleep better near you, he said. She stayed, and for a few hours the storm outside felt like a song. but at 3 a.m. she woke with a start, heart galloping, the old urge to run flaring hot. She lay very still, his arm heavy across her ribs. The instinct came like muscle memory. Don't wake him, don't explain, just go. She breathed through it, counted backward from 100 and stayed. In the morning he slept late, face soft as a child's. She slipped out, left a note, back soon, need air, and walked until the path ran out. The sea flung itself against rocks with a euphoric violence she envied. She sat, pulled her knees in, and admitted a truth she dodged all week. She could love this man and still need distance. The two were not opposites, but could he see that? When she returned, he had breakfast ready and worry in his eyes. I woke up and you were gone, he said. I know you left a note. I panicked. Guilt pricked. I'm not leaving, she said, and watched how the sentence tied a knot in both of them. He relaxed, then asked if after lunch they could plan the rest of the week. Sits together, meals together, shared walks. She froze. Let's not schedule us, she said, aiming for light and landing on brittle. His smile faltered. I feel like you're always halfway out the door. And I feel like you're always at the door, asking me to prove I'm inside. They stared at each other, rain smell still in the library air, and realized they were naming the same ache from opposite shores. Chapter 5: The Fight You Hear Coming. The fight began politely, two careful people tugging at a thread, and ended jagged, the way glass breaks into pieces you don't find for months. It was after dinner. The retreat center was quiet, the hum of conversation from the dining hall dissolving into the softer clatter of dishes, then into the symphony of night insects. The air smelled of basil and wood smoke. They'd spent the day in silence, meditating, walking the coastal trails, trying to remember why they'd come here in the first place, to reconnect, to reset, to breathe. But now, sitting across from each other in the dim communal lounge, even the air between them felt defensive. He asked gently if she could not go into town the next day like she'd mentioned. I want one day of nothing between us, he said, his tone careful, almost pleading. She felt the ask as a closing door. I need to move, she replied. I'll be back by noon. You said that yesterday, he murmured, immediately wincing at himself for keeping score. He looked down, rubbing at his wrist as if erasing the words. I don't want to be needy, he added, but I am, with you. Honesty should have helped. Instead, it made the ground tilt. Arya felt that familiar mix of guilt and irritation rising, how everything true between them also hurt. I don't want to be cruel, she said after a pause, but I'm not a harbor, I'm a road. Roads go somewhere, he said quietly, with someone. Sometimes they just go. He reached for her hand. She let him, fingers grazing warmth for a moment before panic bloomed up her spine like heat, the old instinct to pull away before she disappeared completely. She slipped her hand free. The flinch in his eyes was quick, a bird hitting a window. You're selfish, he said abruptly, then covered his mouth like he'd sworn in a temple. The word detonated between them. It was her oldest accusation, the one that had chased her through every relationship, loved freedom, left people, a mirror she hated. I'm honest, she snapped. I won't pretend to be what you want. What I want is simple, he said, his voice shaking, to know you won't disappear when I blink. I'm not disappearing, she said, though even as she said it, part of her already felt halfway down the road, bathed in dawn light and leaving the sound of him behind. Silence thickened. He swallowed, eyes shining with that painful mixture of love and resignation. I can't do this halfway, he whispered. It hurts. The word hurt softened her, but only for a heartbeat, because she knew what came next, the expectation that her love could be the cure, that her steadiness could fix his fear. I won't apologize for needing space, she said, quieter but no less fierce. Love isn't a surveillance system. He laughed, a short, broken sound. I'm asking for presence, not proof. I'm giving you both, she said, and it's still not enough. The old cat that lived by the teacher's quarters padded between them, tail high, pausing to sniff at their feet before continuing down the hall, indifferent mediator, witness to too many human dramas. Neither of them moved. Finally he exhaled, maybe you should go into town tomorrow. I will, she said, and hated the pettiness of how good the decision felt. They slept in separate rooms. She lay awake, tracing the wooden ceiling beams in the moonlight, listening to the wind trip over the roof tiles. She told herself she was only giving him space, but her chest felt hollow. She rehearsed something gentler for morning, an apology perhaps, or a promise to stay for one more breakfast, but her mind kept slipping toward the image of the open road, curving away from the retreat, toward water and air and anonymity. At dawn, the world outside was pale and expectant. She left a note on his table, just a few words, neat and neutral, and walked to the car. The gravel crunched softly under her sandals. When she looked back, the retreat center's windows were still dark. She drove the winding switchbacks until the ocean appeared, a long blue mirror that seemed to forgive everything. In the seaside town, morning was already awake, bakery doors open, sugar-thick air spilling into the street, dogs towing their sleepy owners toward the pier. She parked near the harbor and walked aimlessly, her body still tuned to the fight, expecting echoes. She bought postcards she wouldn't send, admired rings in a shop window she had no intention of wearing, let the sea wind slap her hair into knots. When her phone buzzed, she didn't need to look to know who it was. "Are you safe?" Julian's text read. She typed yes and then stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, thumb hovering. There was more she could say: "I miss you, I'm sorry, I'll be back soon." But each phrase felt like stepping into quicksand. She set the phone face down on the table and watched the light move across her coffee cup instead. Freedom tasted like coffee with too much sun on it, bitter, bright, almost unbearable. She drank anyway. For the first time in days, the ache in her chest loosened. The sea glinted, endless and indifferent. Somewhere behind her, a bell from the harbor rang the hour, and she imagined him hearing it too, miles away, both of them caught in the same sound, each believing, maybe falsely, that they were finally doing what was best. Chapter 6. The door she didn't knock on. She returned before noon, salt in her hair, a brittle commonplace. The walk back from the beach had been longer than she remembered, each step a small negotiation between what she could forgive and what she could no longer touch. The ocean had offered her no answers, only the vast patience of waves pulling and releasing the shore. She sat there for hours, letting her anger dissolve into something quieter, something that could almost pass for peace. Now, as she crossed the gravel path to the retreat's wooden cabins, she rehearsed a softer conversation in her mind. "I'm back, I chose to be, let's give this breath." The words felt fragile but possible. The retreat grounds looked newly green, as if rain had repainted them in her absence. The air smelled of damp soil and eucalyptus. Somewhere wind chimes murmured. A robin hopped along the railing as if to greet her, and for a brief, foolish second she thought, maybe this can still work. Julian's room was at the end of the corridor, its door slightly ajar. A thin strip of light sliced the hallway floor. She lifted her hand to knock, hesitated, and heard voices, a low, intimate laugh that wasn't his. Her stomach dropped, a sudden physical vertigo. She waited, listening, telling herself it was nothing, a staff member, a conversation, a misunderstanding. Then came the unmistakable music of bed springs, a stifled gasp, and his name. The world narrowed to a keyhole. She pushed the door with the heel of her hand, as if wind had done it. Time fractured. Julian's back bare, a woman she recognized from yoga, dark braid, quick smile, half covered by a sheet. Both of them startled into statues, then into apologies that tripped over each other and never formed sentences. Arya didn't yell, the sound that left her was small and clean, like a string snapping. The woman grabbed her shirt, cheeks flaming. I didn't. She fled barefoot down the hall, leaving silence behind like a trail of broken glass. Julian stood there, blanket twisted in his fist, eyes wide and wet. "Arya," he said, voice hoarse with shock and something else, a kind of terrible relief that made sense a second later. "I thought you left." "I went to town," she said, the steadiness of her voice frightened her. "I came back." He dragged a hand through his hair, panic and shame blooming across his face. "I felt abandoned. I did something stupid. I wanted to feel wanted." "No, that's not." He stopped himself, swallowed, tried again. "I wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt." The words came raw, stripped of excuse. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Her hands were shaking, but not with fury, with clarity, the kind that cuts without bleeding. "You could have told me you were angry," she said quietly. "You didn't have to choose this." She gestured not at the bed, but at everything it represented. The betrayal, the cowardice of it, the easy intimacy offered to anyone but her when she'd chosen air. "I never promised you forever." "You promised you'd come back," he said, and in the wreckage his eyes were a child's. He started to cry quietly, the way he did in meditation, shoulders trembling but breath steady, disciplined even in grief. "I felt like the villain when I needed more. I made you the villain for needing less, and now I'm this." She reached for the chair back because the room tilted. "We are wrong for each other," she said, and the sentence tasted like iron. "Not because you feel too much, not because I run, because we keep making each other prove what we can't be." He nodded, tears shining like confession. "I hate that I did this." "I hate that you did this," she said, and heard the simple courage of it, the first honest sound between them in weeks. He stepped toward her, naked vulnerability more dangerous now than his body. She stepped back. "Don't," she whispered, "please." He stopped. The bell rang for lunch, absurd and holy. They stood in that ordinary sound like two people at a crosswalk where the light would never change. Arya's pulse slowed. The shock began to ebb, leaving a strange weightlessness. She looked around the room that had once held laughter and whispered plans, now heavy with the scent of sweat and guilt. The walls seemed closer, the window smaller. Even the sunlight filtering through the blinds felt indifferent. She turned toward the door. "Take care of yourself," she said, though she didn't know if it was for him or for herself. He didn't answer. His silence was a surrender. She left without slamming the door. The corridor smelled of cedar and lemon oil, bright and clean, erasing everything that had just happened. Her feet moved automatically, the body remembering what the heart hadn't yet caught up to. Outside, the world was still enormous, birds calling, wind stirring the trees, sunlight glinting off the lake below. Her hands found the keys in her pocket as if the decision had been made days ago and was only now catching up. She walked toward the car, past the fountain, past the stone archway where they'd first arrived together, laughing about nothing. The gravel crunched beneath her sandals. The gate ahead looked less like an ending and more like an exit into something mercifully unknown. She paused once, just long enough to breathe in the scent of pine and sea air. Then she opened the car door, started the engine, and drove away, steady, unhurried, leaving the retreat, the mistake, and the ghost of what could have been receding in the mirror until even the memory lost its outline. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was choosing. Chapter 7: The Night Drive. She put her bag in the car at dusk and told no one. The sky turned bruise purple to ink, and the retreat lights came on one by one, warm squares in the dark like windows to lives she had almost joined. She sat behind the wheel and cried with the catalytic purity of someone who has run out of edits. Not pretty tears, not tidy, the kind that shake a body. She pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and sobbed until the sound thinned to breath. Guilt tried to intervene. "You made him do this. You're the road that never ends." And she answered it out loud, voice raw. "He chose." Then, softer, the part that mattered more, "And so do I." She drove, the road unwound like ribbon. Headlights found fox eyes at the verge, reflective coins that vanished. She didn't turn on music. The car became a small cathedral of engine hum and salt air pushing through the cracked window. She tasted the ocean in grief and a startling, disloyal sweetness, space. Images flickered, his hand on her wrist, steady, his shoulders in that room, wrong, the sky the night they first kissed, too full of permission. She let them come and go like waves, didn't hold any long enough to drown. At a turnout, she stopped and looked back. The retreat was a smear of gold among trees. She could go back, have the conversation about boundaries and repentance, and try again. The possibility hovered like mist and then drifted off the cliff, not from anger, but from the clarity that had been stalking her all week and now stood in front of her with an open palm. She whispered to the dark, to herself, to whatever constellation claimed her, "Love without freedom is a prison." Saying it aloud aligned something in her body, joints clicking into place, a door opening that had looked like a wall. She drove until the ocean became rumor and the highway widened. At a motel, she took a room with a door that opened to the parking lot and a bedspread patterned like a bad decision. She showered hot enough to erase, then cold enough to feel. In the mirror, her eyes looked older and truer. In bed, she turned off the light and let the fear come. What if freedom was loneliness with branding? What if she was not brave but avoidant, not wild but fickle? She breathed through the questions without arguing. The ceiling fan cut the air into manageable pieces. Eventually, the body insisted on sleep. She dreamed of running, yes, but not away from, toward a horizon that didn't recede, a line of sky that widened as she approached. When she woke, the motel light was indifferent and perfect. She smiled at the ceiling, small and real. On the nightstand, her phone blinked. Messages from him, long and breaking. She didn't read them yet. She put the phone face down, sat on the edge of the bed, and felt her pulse find a stride that belonged to her. Chapter 8: Arrows and Tides. Morning made everything less dramatic and more true. She bought a coffee that tasted like cardboard in sunlight and drove to a small bluff where the town met the sea. The water below wrote the same sentence it had always written: "Come and go, come and go." She finally read Julian's messages: apology, accountability, a confession of fear, a small, dignified ask to talk if and when she wanted. She typed, "Thank you for your honesty. I'm not coming back. I wish you healing," and deleted it twice before sending a version that was kinder and no less firm. Then she opened the Notes app and wrote 3 lines like vows, simple enough to carry. I will not make myself small to be held. I will not make another person my oxygen. I will love as movement, not surveillance. She laughed at herself for sounding like a self-help oracle and kept them anyway. Weeks later, she would remember the retreat not as a wound but as a compass. She took long runs in new cities, learned which silences were solitude and which were avoidance, told the truth faster. Sometimes desire arrived with a face she could want and a plan attached. She practiced saying, I like you, I'm not a harbor, I am a road, and if you want to walk a while, let's go. The ones who wanted to build toll booths drifted away. The ones who could match her stride lasted longer. None were prisons. As for Julian, she didn't vilify him. When she thought of him, it was sometimes with tenderness and sometimes with the clean ache of a lesson earned too expensively. He had wanted to be loved in a way she didn't know how to give. She had wanted to be loved without being asked to stop being herself. Both were reasonable. Together, they were combustible. On a different coastline months later, she stood on a pier where kites wrote calligraphy against blue and a kid asked if the wind ever got tired. She said no and felt the answer land everywhere that mattered. She texted a friend a photo of the sky and the 3 lines she'd written and added one more. I can be wild and kind at the same time. The sun pressed a warm hand to her back. She walked the planks to the end of the pier, hair in her mouth, keys in her pocket, the day opening like a map that didn't mind being folded and unfolded 1,000 ways. Somewhere behind her life, the bell from that first morning kept ringing, not as command, not as warning, but as a reminder, breathe, choose, move, and she did. Like this video, subscribe, more stories like this are coming.